Welcome to Woodbridge Geometry Virtual Tutor. This video will cover unit triangle properties. The objective is to identify and use angle bisector, perpendicular bisector, altitude, and median of a triangle. Definition of perpendicular bisector is a line, segment, or ray that passes through the midpoint of a line. It is perpendicular to that side. So in the picture, you see that the dotted line is a ray, and it passes through the midpoint of the segment AB at a 90-degree angle. So we now have this segment congruent to this segment. So if the left side is x, the right side is x. If the left side is 5, the right side is 5. If the left side is x plus 5, then the right side is also x plus 5. In the next picture, we have a very similar picture with the addition of the two blue dotted lines. So you'll also notice that the two blue dotted lines are also congruent to each other. This is also true with a perpendicular bisector. So if this side is x, this side is x. So we have a couple examples. Looking at number 1, we have the segment AD is the perpendicular bisector of segment BC. Which statements are true about the triangle? So looking at your answer choices, choice A, you have AB is congruent to AC. So if we look at those two sides, we'll see 2 marks here and 2 marks here. Those are congruence marks. So A is true. If we look at B, B says that AB is congruent to DB. Well, looking at AB, it has 2 congruence marks, but DB only has 1 congruence marks. So those are not congruent to each other. C says that BD is congruent to DC. Looking at BD, we have a congruent mark. And DC has 1 congruent mark, which means that those two sides are congruent. So C is true. D says BD is congruent to AD. So if we look at BD, it has 1 mark. AD doesn't have any marks, so we cannot conclude that those are congruent. Choice E says triangle ABC is a right triangle. ABC is the whole triangle, so in looking at it, we don't have any right angles here, so we cannot say that ABC is a right triangle. So E is not true. F says that triangle ABC is an isosceles triangle. Well, the definition of isosceles triangle is that you have to have 2 congruent sides. So in looking at triangle ABC, we have AB congruent to AC. So we have 2 congruent sides. So we can say that triangle ABC is an isosceles triangle. In our next example, they tell you that EF is the perpendicular bisector of CD. They want you to find X. Well, given that EF is the perpendicular bisector, so we have a right angle here, we know that CF is congruent to DF, and we also know that CE is congruent to DE. So now we can take the expressions given for those two sides and set them equal to each other and solve for X. So 4X plus 19 equals 6X minus 7. And now we can solve. Subtract 4X from both sides. 19 equals 2X minus 7. Add 7. You get 26 equals 2X. Divide by 2. And X equals 13. So now you're going to try. pause the video here, try the problem, start the video again when you're ready to check your work. Okay, so in this question you have triangle DEG, where FH is a perpendicular bisector of DG. So going to your figure, FH is perpendicular bisector, so we know this is a right angle. And we know DH is congruent to HG. If DH is 2y plus 3, so I'm going to go to DH and plug this in, and GH is 7y minus 42, so I can write that in here. And the measure of angle FHG, so if we look at angle FHG and trace it, that's our 90-degree angle. But they're telling me that it is x squared minus 9, or plus 9. They want me to find the value of x and y. So I'm going to start with the sides first. So I know that DH is congruent to HG, so I can set 2y plus 3 equal to 7y minus 42. So now I'm just solving an equation. Subtract 2y, 3 equals 5y minus 42, add 42, so now I have 45 equals 5y, divide by 5, and y equals 9. Okay, so I've solved for y, now I need to solve for x. Well, x is included with the measure of angle FHG, where it is equal to x squared plus 9. But I also know that angle FHG is a right angle, which means it's 90 degrees. So I can take x squared plus 9 and set it equal to 90 and solve for x. So I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides, which gives me x squared equals 81. And then to get rid of the squared, I have to take the square root of both sides. A square cancels out a square root, and the square root of 81 is 9. So now I have x equals 9. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is an angle bisector. An angle bisector is a ray that divides an angle into two congruent angles. So in this figure, PR is an angle bisector of angle QRS. So angle RPQ is congruent to angle RPS. So we have a couple of examples. We're going to assume that all middle lines are angle bisectors. So in our first example, we have the measure of angle 1 is 60 degrees. Well, VP is an angle bisector, so that I know angle 1 and angle 2 are congruent to each other. So if the measure of angle 1 is 60 degrees, the measure of angle 2 is also 60 degrees. Now they're asking me to find the measure of TVU. So if I go to my figure and I trace that angle, TVU, that's a combination of angles 1 and 2. So now all I have to do is add my two angles together, 60 plus 60, and that gives me the angle TVU, which is 120 degrees. So now I can write my answer. The measure of angle TVU is 120 degrees. In the next question, they tell me the measure of angle 2 is 25x, and the measure of angle UWV is 51x minus 1. They want me to find x. Well, they told me to assume all middle lines are angle bisectors. So WP is an angle bisector, which means that angle 1 and angle 2 are congruent to each other. So since the measure of angle 2 is 25x, the measure of angle 1 is also 25x. They also tell me the measure of angle UWV is 51x minus 1. So if I go to that angle and trace it, UWV is the combination of angles 1 and 2. So now I can set up my equation. So 25x plus 25x equals the whole angle 51x minus 1. So over on the left side of the equal sign, I'm going to combine like terms. 50x equals 51x minus 1. I'm going to subtract 51x from both sides. $50x minus 51x is negative 1x. Over here, these cancel out, so that leaves me with negative 1. Divide by negative 1, so x equals 1. So now you're going to pause the video and try the next question. All right, so in this question, they ask you to find x if the measure of angle 1 is 7x plus 6, and the measure of angle 2 is 8x plus 2. So given that WP is an angle bisector, we know that angle 1 and angle 2 are equal. Well, I know the measure of angle 1 is 7x plus 6, and the measure of angle 2 is 8x plus 2. Well, knowing the two angles that result from the angle bisector are congruent, I can now set these two items equal to each other. So now I solve my equation. And that gives me x equals 4. The next item that we're going to look at is a median. A median is a segment whose endpoints are a vertex of a triangle and the midpoint of the side opposite the vertex. So in looking at your figure, you have your vertex here, and this is your midpoint. So that makes this segment congruent to this segment. So if this side is 5, this side is also 5. Every triangle has 3 medians. So in question number 1, let CV be a median. So because CV is a median, that makes TC congruent to UC. So they're asking you to find TU, which is the length of the whole side, if CU is 5. So since CU is 5 and CU and TC are congruent, then TC is also 5. Well, looking at TU, TU is a combination of TC and UC, so we're just going to add those two together. 5 plus 5 equals 10. So now we can say that the measure of TU equals 10. In our next example, we have let CX be a median. So I know BX and XD are going to be congruent. They're asking me to find X if BD is 8X. Well, looking at the figure, BD goes all the way across. That is 8X. And XD is 5X minus 1. So here I'm going to put 5X minus 1. Well, XD and BX are congruent, so that means BX is also 5X minus 1. So now I can write my equation 5X minus 1 plus 5X minus 1 equals 8x. Combine like terms, 5x plus 5x is 10x. Negative 1 minus 1 is minus 2, equal 8x. Subtract 10x. Gives me negative 2 equals negative 2x. Divide by negative 2, so x equals 1. Now pause the video and try the next two problems. All right, so in the first question, they say let DV be a median. So that tells you CV and VB are congruent. They're asking you to find CB, which is the total length across, if VB is 10.7. Well, if VB is 10.7, CV is also 10.7. So we just add those two measures together to get the length of CB. So when you add those together, you get 21.4. So CB equals 21.4. In your next question, you have two medians. You have JW and IV. So looking at JW, it hits this side here. So we know that IW and WH are congruent. And given that IV is a median, we know that JV is congruent to VH. So they want us to find X if HJ, which is all the way across here, is 8X, and VJ is 3X plus 2. Well, VJ is congruent to VH, so that means VH is also 3X plus 2. So now I can set up my equation. 3X plus 2 plus 3X plus 2 equals 8X. Combine like terms, 3X plus 3X is 6X. 2 and 2 is 4, still equal to 8X. Subtract 6X, gives you 4 equals 2X. Divide by 2, so X equals 2. The last one that we're going to look at is altitude. The altitude of a triangle is a segment through a vertex and perpendicular to that side. Every triangle has 3 altitudes, and sometimes the altitudes are outside of the triangle. So looking at our two pictures here, they're showing you altitude here on the first triangle, and altitude makes a 90-degree angle. But sometimes, like in the second triangle, your altitude falls on the outside. So that's an imaginary line that is representing the altitude of the red triangle. This altitude lays on the outside of the triangle, but it makes a 90-degree angle with the base. So looking at our example, we have YB as an altitude of triangle XYZ. So YB makes a 90-degree angle with the base. They're telling us that the measure of angle YBZ, so if we trace YBZ, that's this angle here, is equal to 6x minus 6. They want us to find the value of x. Well, we know that triangle YBX is a right angle because altitudes make right angles. So we can take 6x minus 6 and set it equal to 90 degrees. So you add 6, you get 6x equals 96. divide by 6, you get x equals 16. But going back to the question, they also ask you what is the measure of angle YBZ. Well, we know angle YBZ is where the altitude is. And we already talked about that it's 90 degrees because it's a right angle. So we can now state that the measure of angle YBZ equals 90 degrees. So pause the video here and try the next two questions. All right, so in this question, we have RS is an altitude of triangle RTE. So RS makes a 90-degree angle here. They're telling you that the measure of SRT is 4x minus 8. So you go to SRT, which is this angle right here. And we know that that equals 4x minus 8. And they also tell you that the measure of STR is 6x plus 13. So this angle right here is 6x plus 13. Well, if we look at this triangle right here, we have all three angles. And we know the three angles of a triangle should add up to 180. So I'm going to set up the equation. 6x plus 13 plus 4x minus 8 plus 90 equals 180. Combine like terms, 6x plus 4x is 10x. 13 minus 8 is 5. 5 plus 90 is 95, equal to 180. Subtract 95. Gives you 10x equals 85. Divide by 10. Gives you x equals 8.5. In the next question, they tell you to find x, CD, and DB if AD is an altitude of triangle ABC. So they tell you that AD is an altitude, so we know that this right here is a 90-degree angle. And this side over here is also a 90-degree angle. Well, they also tell us this right here is 4x minus 6. So I can set up an equation for x saying 4x minus 6 equals 90. Add 6. Gives you 4x equals 96. Divide by 4 gives you x equals 28. So now we look at CD. CD is x plus 7. Well, I've just found x, so now I can plug that in. 28 plus 7 is 35. And they're also asking me to find DB, which I know is 2x minus 15. But I know x is 28. Two times 28 is 56. And 56 minus 15 is 41.